The space around them was silent, too silent. The fleet, once brimming with pride, hovered just outside the system, waiting. The human mining vessel on the radar looked harmless enough. To the untrained eye, it was nothing more than an old industrial ship, its hull scratched and scarred from years of labor deep in the asteroid fields. The type of ship no one would waste time worrying about. The kind of ship the Council dismissed as insignificant. "Keep the scan steady," the commander ordered, his voice calm, even condescending. "It's just a mining ship. No threats. Let's move in." The first officer, a veteran of countless skirmishes, nodded, though his eyes lingered on the ship. It was slow-moving, its engines dull, emitting nothing more than faint traces of energy. Nothing to indicate any hint of a surprise. Still, a tinge of doubt wormed its way into his thoughts. Could it be a trap? "Are you sure it's not some sort of trick?" the first officer asked, his voice tinged with the faintest hint of skepticism. "Just follow orders," the commander snapped, shaking his head. "We've wasted enough time already. This is a quick sweep, a clean-up operation. They're already done for. Earth, as a species, has nothing left. There's no fight left to give." The first officer said nothing, though the unease lingered. In his chest, like an unresolved chord, they had seen the humans' desperation before, their last-ditch efforts to make their last stand in the face of inevitable defeat. But Earth had no real military presence, no real fleet. A mining ship, it was just a tool, a resource, a symbol of the humans' failure to innovate in warfare. "Captain," the comms officer spoke up, his voice a little too steady, a little too calm. "I'm getting an unusual reading on the ship. Something's changing. The ship's expanding?" The words hung in the air for a fraction of a second before the realization struck the commander like a thunderbolt. His heart stopped in his chest as the hull of the mining ship started to unfold, slowly, methodically. At first, it seemed like a trick of the light, a malfunction. But then the ship's form began to shift, extending, expanding, revealing colossal, gleaming cannons one by one, as massive turrets began to rise from hidden compartments. This wasn't a mining ship. This was a weapon they had underestimated. The first officer's eyes widened. "What the hell?" The commander's mouth went dry. "Fire at will," he snapped, the words tumbling out without thinking. His hand hovered over the console, ready to issue the command, but it was too late. The ship's cannons unfolded like a deadly blossom, their monstrous barrels aiming at their fleet. And then, boom! A single shot rang out, a beam of energy that cut through the void and slammed into their lead ship, disintegrating it in an instant. The shockwave was felt throughout the fleet. The commander's hand froze, the screen flashing red as warnings began to cascade across the console. The first officer gasped. "Sir, we're being hit from all sides. Retaliate now." The commander's voice had risen in panic as the full scale of the situation dawned on him. The ship was no longer a mining vessel. It was a battleship, and it had just unleashed hell. The fleet scrambled to respond, weapons charging, shields flickering into position. But the human ship, that mining ship, was quicker. A second shot rang out, this one catching a mid-range destroyer dead center, blasting it into nothing but scrap. The commander's stomach turned. How had they missed this? How had they been so blind? Where the hell did they hide that? The first officer shouted, scrambling to recalibrate their weapons targeting systems. "Focus!" the commander shouted, a fire building in his chest. "Get us into position. Fire everything we have at that ship." It was too late. The ship had already unleashed a third volley. The fleet's shields couldn't withstand the onslaught. The massive cannons fired. Again and again, sending shockwaves through the ranks of their ships. The devastation was swift, surgical, and efficient. The human ship wasn't finished. Another cannon unfolded, larger than the others, its barrel glowing with deadly energy. The commander's eyes widened in horror as the new weapon powered up. "Get "Us out of here," the first officer screamed, panic creeping into his voice. "We can't survive another hit." But before the fleet could reposition, the human ship fired the final shot. A beam so large and powerful it seemed to tear apart the fabric of space itself. The flagship was struck full force. The lights flickered, systems shut down in an instant. The ship groaned under the pressure, its hull splitting open as if made of paper. The commander's chest tightened as he watched their flagship disintegrate before his eyes. This can't be happening. Not like this. And then, the communications. Screen came to life again. The human commander, standing in front of a similar starry backdrop, her expression cold and resolute, appeared on the screen. "You were warned," she said, her voice calm, devoid of emotion. "Earth's fight was never about your understanding. You thought it was a mining ship. You thought we were weak. Now you know. Earth is not done. We were never gone, and we'll fight for every inch of our survival until the very end." The transmission cut off abruptly, and the commander could only stare, his heart sinking into the abyss of realization. It wasn't just about fighting back. Earth had won. They had planned for this. They had kept their true weapon hidden, waiting, until the moment was right to strike. "We underestimated them," the first officer whispered, his voice thick with disbelief. The commander didn't speak, his mind overwhelmed by the weight of their failure. The fleet was decimated, and Earth had sent a message loud and clear. They were no longer the prey. They were the hunters. "They thought it was a mining ship," the commander muttered, his voice hoarse. Then it unfolded its cannons, and that was before Earth even responded. The silence in the command center was deafening, broken only by the occasional crackle of failing communication systems. The commander stood motionless, his gaze locked on the damaged viewport. The once imposing fleet of ships was now nothing more than a scattered wreckage of twisted metal and broken technology. The human vessel, once thought to be an insignificant mining ship, had obliterated their forces with a precision and power that shattered everything the commander had believed about Earth's capabilities. The loss was staggering, and yet Earth's message was clear. They were not just a species to be destroyed, they were a force. "Sir," the first officer's voice trembled, cutting through the commander's thoughts. "We've lost nearly 60% of the fleet. The flagship, gone. The rest of the fleet is in disarray. We can't maintain formation." The commander didn't respond immediately, his mind whirling. Every strategy they had relied on, every calculation about Earth's weakness, had been wrong. Earth wasn't just fighting for survival, it was fighting with everything it had, with a force and intensity that had far outstripped their expectations. The mining ship had not only concealed its true power, it had destroyed everything in its path, all while the alien fleet had underestimated it. "Prepare a report on the surviving ships," the commander said, his voice hoarse. "We need to assess our remaining strength." The officer scrambled to bring up the data, his fingers working frantically at the console. The commander looked around, catching the eyes of his remaining officers. They were all on edge, their faces ashen. The overwhelming loss was sinking in. But it wasn't just the physical damage, it was the realization that Earth had changed the battlefield. They had turned the tables, and the Empire was no longer the predator, it was the prey. "Sir, the remaining fleet, only 4 ships are still operational. We've lost communication with 2 of them," the officer said, his voice filled with disbelief. "We're outclassed, completely." The commander swallowed hard, gripping the armrest of his chair as if holding on to the last shreds of his composure. "We underestimated them," he whispered to himself. "Sir," the comms officer spoke up, "there's something else. We've detected a signal, a transmission from Earth." The commander's gaze snapped to the officer. "What, a signal from Earth?" "Yes, sir, it's coming from the human fleet. I've isolated the frequency." The comms officer's hands were shaking as he processed the incoming data. "It's It's not a simple transmission, it's a challenge. The commander's breath caught in his throat. A challenge. He had been wrong about Earth's intentions from the very beginning. They hadn't just been trying to survive, they had been waiting for the right moment to strike. "Patch it through," he ordered, his voice thick with anticipation and dread. The bridge went silent as the comms officer worked quickly. The moment the transmission came through, the commander's chest tightened. The screen flickered to life, and there, standing tall and unwavering, was the human commander. Her expression was calm, but the fire in her eyes was unmistakable. "You thought you could come here and wipe us out," she began, her voice cold and commanding. "You thought we were a dying species, weak and helpless. But we've been preparing. We've been waiting for this moment. You came expecting to take everything from us, but now you will learn. Earth is not done, and we will not fall." The commander stood frozen, his mind struggling to process the words. A human standing alone had just delivered a message more powerful than anything he had ever heard. They had prepared for this. They had expected the Empire's arrival, and they had turned every assumption the Empire had made against them. The human commander continued, her voice gaining strength. "You think your ships are invincible, your weapons unmatched, but you have misjudged us. The mining ships you thought you were dealing with were not just tools of labor. They were part of a greater plan, a plan that has already begun." The transmission flickered, and the commander's eyes narrowed. "What is she talking about?" he demanded, his voice filled with mounting confusion. Before anyone could answer, the human commander's face appeared again, and this time the expression was unmistakable. A slight smile curled on her lips as she spoke her final words. "You thought it was a mining ship," she said, her voice calm and decisive. "Then it unfolded its cannons, and that was just the beginning." The transmission cut off abruptly, and the commander was left in stunned silence. A cannon, a mining ship, had just turned into a deadly war machine, and he was left wondering how much more they had hidden from the Empire. Earth was no longer a helpless planet. It was a sleeping giant, a force that had been quietly building strength, preparing for this day. The first officer was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, we've been outclassed. They've been preparing for this war longer than we've even known they existed. What do we do now?" The commander turned slowly, his expression hardened with the weight of their loss. "We fight, we regroup, we assess, and we strike back. Earth has made it clear they're not going down without a fight, and neither are we. But we need to rethink everything we thought we knew. We have no choice now but to adapt." "We're out of options, sir," the first officer said, his tone darkening. "Earth has changed the rules of this war. We're not fighting a species on the brink of extinction. We're fighting a new power, a power that knows how to fight our fight." The commander's eyes narrowed, his mind churning. The moment of realization had come. It was no longer just about conquering Earth, it was about survival. The Empire had come to take everything, but in doing so, they had awakened a force that had been lying in wait, preparing for the very moment when the Empire thought it could strike. For the first time, the commander understood. He understood. The power of Earth's silence. They had been watching, they had been biding their time, and now Earth was no longer a fragile species. They were the ones with the advantage. "They thought it was a mining ship," the commander murmured, a chill creeping up his spine. "Then it unfolded its cannons." And that was before Earth even responded. The commander stood frozen before the main viewport, watching as the remnants of his fleet drifted into nothingness, a haunting spectacle of destruction. The transmission from Earth had left him paralyzed, with disbelief. They thought it was a mining ship, then it unfolded its cannons. The words echoed in his mind like a cruel, irreversible twist of fate. Earth, once seen as nothing more than a backwater planet, a place to extract resources and exploit, had turned the tables in a way that left the Empire reeling. The shockwaves of their attack still reverberated through the commander's thoughts. Earth had not only survived their assault, they had anticipated it, planned for it, and struck back with a power no one had ever expected. A cold silence filled the bridge, broken only by the distant hum of failing systems and the occasional alarm. The officers on the command deck moved with robotic precision, their eyes downcast, their faces etched with the grim realization of their failure. "Sir," the first officer finally spoke, his voice laced with disbelief, "we've lost contact with the remaining ships. Earth, they've dismantled our forces in a matter of hours." The commander turned slowly to face the officer, his eyes clouded with frustration and fear. How could we have been so wrong? His voice was barely a whisper, heavy with regret. "How did they hide all of this from us?" The first officer shook his head, his eyes wide in shock. "We thought they were weak. We thought they were finished, but they've been building an entire war machine right under our noses. That mining ship was just the beginning. They knew we were coming." The commander clenched his fists, the weight of their arrogance now crushing him. The fleet had assumed that Earth was too fragmented, too primitive to pose any real threat. They had calculated the attack with cold precision, but Earth had proven that they were far more capable than anyone had given them credit for. They were waiting for the right moment, for the Empire to make its move. "Sir," the comms officer interrupted, his voice unsteady, "we've got another transmission. It's Earth again." The commander's heart skipped a beat. What more could they possibly have to say? Hadn't they made their point clear enough? "Put it through," the commander said, his voice tinged with resignation. The screen flickered to life once more, and the familiar face of the human commander appeared. This time there was no smug confidence, no quiet smile. Her expression was solemn, almost remorseful. She stood alone, facing the camera, her hands folded in front of her. "Commander," she began, her voice calm and deliberate, "I know this is difficult to comprehend. We were once a world divided, just like yours. We didn't ask for this fight, we didn't seek out war, but we've been pushed to this point by forces greater than ourselves, the Empire's hunger for power. It's something we couldn't ignore any longer." The commander's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about? You've destroyed our fleet. Your attack has left us broken." The human commander's gaze softened, but her words were unwavering. "It was never our intention to destroy you. But when your empire moved against us, we had no choice. You didn't give us an option. You've taken everything from us, from our people, our planet. All we wanted was to be left alone, to live." The transmission cut out, leaving the bridge. Crew in stunned silence. The commander was left speechless. Earth, this human species, had fought back not with rage, but with purpose. They had acted out of necessity, out of desperation. They had struck with the force of a species that had been pushed to its breaking point. The first officer broke the silence, his voice quiet but steady. "Do we retaliate?" The commander stared at the flickering image on the screen, his mind racing. He had spent his entire career conquering, subjugating, and destroying. It was all he knew. But Earth had turned their methods back on them, with ruthless precision and an understanding that made the Empire's power look impotent by comparison. "No," the commander replied, his voice heavy. "We don't retaliate. Not yet. We need to understand what they've done, what they've built." He turned to the officer at the radar station. "Do we have any readings on their fleet? How many ships are we up against?" The radar officer hesitated, his fingers flying over the console, eyes darting between screens. "We're not sure. Sir, we know there are at least a dozen ships, but they're moving in ways we can't predict. It's like they're anticipating every maneuver we make." The commander's stomach turned. This isn't just a military force anymore. They've evolved. They've adapted in ways we couldn't even conceive. The first officer's voice shook. "What do we do now?" The commander closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. "What now?" The answer was clear, though it felt like the gravest of decisions. They had underestimated Earth. They had assumed that Earth's desperation would make them predictable, weak. But now, Earth had proven them wrong. And the commander knew that nothing would ever be the same again. "We regroup," he said finally, his voice cold and resolute. "We retreat, and we reanalyze everything. We need to understand what we're facing before we make our next move. The Empire doesn't operate out of desperation, but Earth has shown us what true survival looks like. We've been dealing with a species that has had to fight for its very existence. We will adapt. We have to." The first officer nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "And if they come for us again?" "We'll be ready," the commander said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But this time we'll be ready to understand what they're capable of. Because Earth has already shown us." As the last of their fleet began its retreat, the commander felt the weight of their defeat. Earth had not just been defending itself, it had been preparing, and they had learned. Adaptation, survival, and now the Empire would have to adapt as well, and that was before Earth even responded. The command center was in chaos, the remnants of the fleet scattered across space, their once proud ships now drifting like broken shells. The commander stood at the front of the bridge, his face pale, his hands shaking slightly as he gripped the armrests. Their world had turned upside down in a matter of hours. Earth, that backwater planet, had shown the Empire what true resilience looked like. They had thought Earth was lost, a forgotten species ripe for the taking. Now Earth had delivered a crushing blow, one that reverberated through every officer on the bridge. "Sir, we've lost nearly all communication with the remaining fleet," the radar officer reported, his voice tight with fear. "The few ships still operational are retreating. The rest, they've either been destroyed or incapacitated." The commander closed his eyes, his mind racing. How did it go so wrong? He had been so sure of their superiority. The Empire's might, its technological advancements, had always been enough to crush any opposition. But Earth had broken that belief with a single devastating strike. The mining ship, the one they thought was weak and helpless, had turned into a juggernaut. And now their Empire was on the brink of collapse. "Get me a status on Earth's fleet," the commander ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. "How many ships do they have left? What's their movement?" The radar officer hesitated, his fingers trembling over the controls. "They've regrouped, sir, and they're moving toward us. Fast. They're not retreating. They're coming. After us." The commander's stomach twisted with a mixture of fear and anger. "They're coming after us?" After everything they had done to Earth, after the destruction they had brought to this planet, Earth was now coming for them. The thought was almost incomprehensible, but there was no time to dwell on that now. Earth's forces were relentless, and he had to make a choice. "Prepare all remaining ships," the commander said, his voice firm despite the tension in his chest. "We're not running anymore. We fight. We face them head-on." A moment of hesitation passed before the first officer spoke, her voice strained. "Sir, are you sure? We don't have the firepower to defeat them. We've lost too much." The commander turned slowly, his gaze cold and unwavering. "We've already lost. Running won't change that. We can either face them like warriors, or let them finish what they started." The words hung in the air, a heavy decision pressing on everyone in the room. For the first time in the commander's career, he felt doubt creeping into his heart. He had always believed in the Empire's invincibility. It was a belief that had guided his every action. But now, facing Earth's relentless pursuit, he realized that belief had been shattered. "Target Earth's flagship," the commander ordered, his voice hard. "Fire everything we have. We go down fighting." The remaining officers scrambled to carry out the order, their movements quick and determined. The last few ships powered up their weapons, but the commander knew it wouldn't be enough. Earth had proven that they were not to be underestimated. And now, as the fleet faced the full wrath of Earth's forces, the Empire's once unassailable power was crumbling, As the weapons powered up and the ships began their final charge, the commander stood at the helm, his hands gripping the console as if it was the only thing keeping him anchored in this reality. The vastness of space stretched before them, the stars dimming in the distance as Earth's fleet closed in. "Sir!" the comms officer called, her voice trembling. "We're getting a message from Earth." "Put it through," the commander replied, though he already knew what it would say. Earth had shown no mercy before. Why would they now? The screen flickered, and the human commander's face appeared. Again, this time her expression was calm, almost mournful. There was no arrogance in her gaze, no gloating over their defeat, just a quiet resolve. "We did not want this war," she said, her voice steady, each word carrying weight. "We tried to survive, to endure, but your empire forced our hand. You came here thinking you could take everything from us. But you underestimated us, and now you see what happens when you push a species too far." The transmission flickered again, and the human commander's eyes met the camera. "We've won. You were warned." The screen cut to black. The commander stood motionless, the weight of her words sinking in. Earth had won. The Empire was defeated. There would be no more conquests, no more battles for power. The humans had fought back with a force they had never seen coming, and now the Empire would be nothing more than a footnote in the history of a species they had dismissed. "Sir," the first officer whispered, "we're out of options." The commander's eyes remained fixed on the empty screen. There were no words left to say. Earth had shattered everything the Empire had built, and the price of that arrogance was too high to ignore. "Let's get out of here," the commander finally said, his voice barely audible, "before it's too late." As the last of the remaining ships began to retreat, the commander felt the weight of defeat settle over him. The Empire was done. Earth had won, and that was before Earth even responded.